Hi, everyone. Welcome to our very first Area Show and Tell webinar. We're super excited to have you guys here. My name is Melinda. I'm a content marketing specialist at Media and Entertainment Autodesk. Today, we're going to be going into this super awesome webinar with two great VFX artists. So we're super excited about it. In the first half of our webinar, we'll be joined by Arvid Schneider, who will be looking at texturing, lighting, and shading for feature digital production. And then he'll be also looking through doing it with Maya, Arnold, and Substance Painter. In the second half of our webinar, we'll be joined by Eloi Andaluz Fullà. We'll be looking at key destruction techniques and scene preparation in 3ds Max, as well as compositing rules for destruction. Each of these presentations will then be followed by a 10-minute Q&A session with the artists. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be sure to get to that during the Q&A sessions. And then, of course, the entire webinar will be recorded. So if you miss any aspect of it, don't fret. We'll be sure to email you that within a few days. So before we start, just a few little details. We're all working from home right now, so please bear with us. If there are any technical difficulties, we promise we're doing our best. And then we also have a few more webinars like this one coming out in the near future. So if you'd like to hear more on that, please join our community website area at area.autodesk.com for all that information. All right, so now to the fun stuff. It is with my great pleasure that I introduce our first guest artist, Arvid Schneider. Arvid is a senior VFX artist at Industrial Light and Magic in Vancouver, BC, where he's a lighting and look dev TD. He's worked on major Hollywood feature films such as Jurassic World, Transformers, Spectra, Aquaman, and many more. And he also has a YouTube VFX channel where he helps artists with tutorials, insights, and VFX workflows. So we'll be sure to put that in the chat box so you can check it out. So without further ado, here is Arvid.
There you go. I just had some focus issues, but thank you very much for that great introduction. So let me just share my screen here once I get there we go. Let's just do that. All right, so I'll be talking just a bit like an overview about the integration work you would need to do to place a digital asset into a scene. It's more or less an overview of everything. So like I have tutorials about this on my YouTube channel, which go way more into depth than what we'll be showing today. But just give you an overall idea how to do these kind of things. So let's just get going here. So as you can see, we are right now in Maya, and this model was actually provided from one of my Discord, which is me actually to model this guy, so I'm able to use this in this seminar, which is. Sorry, just starting again. I did not share the computer audio, but now we go. So as you can see, we are right now in Maya, and this model was actually provided from one of my people over on Discord, which is Hisham. He helped me actually to model this guy, so I'm able to use this in this seminar, which is great, right? So you can see it has a very simple topology, which is perfect. And what I did though, I exported this as a high quality mesh as well, which means I just subdivided that and then I exported two Alembic files. One is this, and then the other one is a more dense mesh. And after that import, I just went into Substance Painter and imported those objects. So I just went to File, New Project, and I picked the low version up here and changed my resolution size to 2K and just brought that into the scene. What I then did, I created those mesh maps, and it takes a bit of time to generate them, so I just did that already. And you can already see that if I show them, this is what they look like with curvature, normal, occlusion, and all these different ID maps. And then we have this loaded into our scene. And as I start out, you can see my references here. This is how the droid looks, and I actually shot them when I went to Disney recently. So you can see there, it looks like there's some metallic paint at the bottom layer, and then there's like a yellow coat, and then there's the red color coat on top. So what I did, I created a metallic base, which is just like a preset material here. I think it's steel corroded or something like that. Let's just have a quick look here. Steel ruined, which I picked. I just adjusted it a tiny bit, like in terms of changing like a few of those parameters, like edge highlight, I reduced that a bit and all these things. And then quite straightforward, I just added a second material, which I picked as well as a preset. Like I picked like machinery, and just on top of that, I obviously changed quite a few values in here. So I reduced the dustiness, I reduced the dust and the rust, and then all I had to do then was create a mask, which is actually like an edge mask, which will break up the edges from that paint. So if you can see here, this is my edge mask, and it's just a mask builder which is based on curvature and like grunge maps, which is just breaking it up. So whatever is black here in that mask will actually show the layer below it. And then a cool thing which you can do if you want to play around with like these color drifts, which you can also see he has here like some, like as if some fluid was running down his body. You can just create the physical paint or go to the physical paint brush and create a paint mask like that. And then if you go into that brush, you can hit 2 for picking it a bit faster. And then just make sure you pick a nice particle brush. Let's just pick the leaks one. And now if you just paint, you can see now stuff is just dripping down here. And you can obviously go really crazy and play around and add everywhere some like leaks and breakup, which is pretty cool and a pretty nice way to add like more breakup to your surfaces. You can see now like paint is dripping down, and obviously you gotta be a bit more vigilant with that so it's not overpowering, right? And then I just went ahead and created another layer, which is the red one here. And I used some in the mask itself. I used some paint layer as well, and I just brushed like these decals in here. So you can just change your brush size and maybe pick a hard brush like that, and then you just paint on it. You can also hit F4 to go into the UV mode, which allows you to paint straighter lines like that. But it's again what is preferred for you. You can also use a stencil. And then what I use, which is nice, there's like this color selection. You can right click and create a color selection node in here. And what this allows you to do is just pick essentially a color like that, and then it will just apply that. It's like a quick mask feature. And then I went ahead and created a plastic material on top of all of that. And you can see I just built it up. So there's now like a basic plastic, which is like the front of his face. And then this red eye thingy or this camera, and then like a blue plastic. And it's just essentially picking up preset shaders, adjusting them, and be done with that. And right now you can see I'm just working on the one texture set, and you can, if I go to the different texture sets, you can see that there are like kind of different things. I just copied all the shaders or the nodes into all those different texture sets, which allowed me to just assign different shaders. So for instance, in texture set 2, which is the bottom one, I just added this rubber tire one. And the same way I just showed before, I just used a color selector to just pick the color here. And then the plastic was assigned to that. So I would say that's fairly straightforward workflow. And you can obviously go into more detail and paint more bump maps and go really crazy on matching this. But I think this, at least this way here, should give you a very good overview of how things are done and how you would actually apply this. Obviously, this is a seminar, and I just wanted to show you the workflow itself. So you would need to spend a bit more time to paint everything in more detail and have more fun, I guess. And then all you have to do is go to your file menu and click to export textures. And essentially then I picked the output template Arnold preset, which sets most of the things up already. All I had to do was change my type to EXR like that, and pick an output location, and then just hit export, which will then bake me out all the maps into my Maya standard folder source images. Right, so what we can do next is then go into Maya and just import them. So I'm just hiding my reference here. And if I open up the Hypershade, we should have a clear scene. If I just delete my test shaders here, so everything is gone. And I'm just assigning the standard default shader to this. So we're starting from scratch here, which seems doesn't exist anymore. So I'm just applying a new standard surface shader, which will be our heavy loader material. Like that, right? And if I hit render now, we should just see him in the scene, right? Fairly basic stuff. So obviously what I'm going to do now is import the shaders, and I have a little import script, but just helps me to get things into the scene. Essentially just going into the directory and importing AI image nodes and setting it to a UDIM. So if I just execute this code here, I'm going into my Maya project folder, go to source images where I have all my maps exported, and then I just hit open, which will then import all those maps. So you can see we've got 5 maps in here. And now let's just hook them up. So base color goes to the base color, metalness just the luminance value. I'm just picking the red channel, goes into the metalness slot. And then we have roughness, which goes to specular roughness, like here. And then we have normal and height, but I'll be just using the height map, which I'll be applying a bump map to it. So I'm just picking again the luminance, red channel, bump map, and pick that into, or move that into normal camera. Open up Arnold render view and just hit render and see what we get. And you can already see now everything is loaded in and looks very similar to what we have in Substance Painter. Only our light source is flipped, so obviously I can just rotate our key light, and now it's front lit, and now we see the robot in here. So what I wanted to show you now is how would you integrate that into a scene. And I have like these plates, like this one, and we will be using this one. So obviously you want to match the perspective to place your object. So I'm using this now, and I'm using FSpy, which is a third-party software, which I can open just up, hit Ctrl-N for a new scene. And then I just want to drag in this image here. So I think it's image 61. And you can see it already creates all your perspective lines. Like so. I think it did not actually reset it properly, but all you have to do is just make sure you have X and Y, and then you pick your image like perspective lines like I did. So this is my red perspective line, and by holding shift you can actually have a more detailed picker. So I'm just making sure that I'm picking the axis quite accurately to get the correct focal length, and then I'm picking the x-axis here, aligning that, and I do the same for the y-axis like so, and for the top part. So you can already see now, if I dim the image back, this is our current scene coordinate system, and I want to have the z facing upwards, so I'm just flipping -x here. So now the z-axis is pointing upwards, and I just want to make sure I move this point to my scene origin, and I just want the origin to be somewhere around here. And one thing I need to do still is add a third perspective vanishing point, which allows me to get it even more accurate. So now we have this in place like this and that, and this just allows me to place it fairly accurately. You can also display your focal length, which is 25, and then if you're happy with that, I'm just saving the scene here, save as, and we just save it on top of this untitled one. And right now there is no Maya plugin to import this directly, so what I want to do now is just open a third-party, like a second application, and just import those FSpy files, which I just exported now. So let's just bring that in, and it just loads in your camera essentially. And we'll be just exporting this so we have a Maya-friendly format here. So just going File, Export again. Once it's imported, Export FBX. We just want to call it the same. We just keep it as untitled. Obviously you want to give it a proper name. And once you have it exported, all you have to do is go File, Import, and pick the FBX file. I think we just exported this one here, and import that. And then you can already see we have the camera in place, and it's placed right there. So if I now look through it, this is what we get. And obviously what we want to do as well is load in this image. So we go to our image plane loader and pick the correct image, which is this one. And now we should see that like that. Make sure you have the right color space. I need to set it to output sRGB because I don't want to apply any color transformations on it, and I want to use ACES color workflow, right? So essentially now what we have to do is match our or place our object a bit better. So right now my scale is like, he's like I think 2.5 meters high. So all we have to do now is just move him a bit closer to the camera until we're satisfied with our scale, or move him up a bit. So I'm creating now a plane, a ground plane, where he's supposed to be standing on, and you can see it's matching fairly great with that, with the ground floor of the scene here. And we might be a bit too small, but I think this might work. So what I can do now is just assign a shadow matte material. If I go to assign new material, go to Arnold tab, and pick the shadow matte, and maybe make it a bit smaller so it's not occluding too much. And now we can rotate our droid and rotate it facing camera, something like that probably. And just hit render and see what we get. Let's see, look through the perspective camera. And you can see now this is how our droid is placed in the scene. We might need to align the shadows a bit, or at least rotate our environment. Like you can see the shadows are a bit more side lit. So we can just fairly straightforward, just rotate it to get a bit more light on him. Maybe like this. And this is totally up to you now how you want to place it, right? It's fairly straightforward, and you can move it. You can obviously change your angle, but this is essentially what I wanted to show you, how you can integrate an asset into your scene in a very straight and easy manner. And this, I think, looks fairly integrated already. It's a bit dark, so we might need to maybe push the environment light up a bit or play around with the shaders, but I can just boost the environment light for now. And you can see now what we are getting is a pretty cool looking droid placed into the scene, right? All right, so I hope this was a quick overview of how you would do like a production ready asset, bring it into, like, first of all, export it, bring it into Substance Painter, do some quick paint jobs, and then export this into Maya, import your maps, and then you would go into like a F-Spy or some other application to match your perspective, export the camera, bring it into Maya, and then you have everything in the same world, and you can actually set up your render passes, like your shadow passes, do more beauty lighting on it. But all in all, this is essentially a typical workflow, how it would be in a production environment. All right, so that was the quick overview of all the different things you got to do. And I just prepared a few more beauty renders for you guys. So I just wanted to place them a bit better so I can actually see a different render, like how he fits in the scene in general. So essentially he's just walking around, and yeah, pay attention to the shadows, which work very well. And then yeah, he's just posing himself, and then he's slowly walking out of the screen, and then this is it. So I hope this was interesting for you guys. I've got some social media pages which you can check it out, and yeah, I just want to hand it over back to Melinda so we can get that Q&A started.
Thanks so much, Arvid. Yeah. That was awesome. I just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions for Arvid, please put them in the Q&A box so that we can answer them. While waiting for some of those questions to pop up, Arvid, I guess I'll just ask you a few questions if that's cool. Yeah, sure. So I was wondering how you got started in the 3D industry.
Oh yeah, it's a good question, and it's probably a long answer, but I'll try to keep it brief. So it all started in the gaming industry, or when I started to play Counter-Strike and all these things. So our opponent team had always like a crazy introduction video of their characters. And essentially I just wanted to do that for our team too. And then I asked him what software did he use? And he actually said 3ds Max, which was way back. I'm not sure which version, but it was very old, I guess. And then from there on, actually, I was hooked with 3D, and I just, yeah, progressed. I worked, created obviously our own intro video, and then I just did tutorials online on 3D Total back in the day, where you actually had to read the tutorial instead of actually watching it. Yeah, and then obviously Pixar movies happen, and Pirates of the Caribbean happened with Davy Jones and all these amazing projects. And then yeah, I just went into commercials, then feature animation, and then now I'm in VFX land since like I think 6-7 years now. So I'm still happy, and I'm still stoked to do it every day. So yeah,
that's essentially awesome. Yeah, you sound super passionate about it too, which is great. What advice would you give someone who's looking to get into this industry, who's maybe like starting off, or like a student who admires your work? What would I tell him to get started? Yeah, any advice you have for them?
It's definitely tough because it's very competitive out there. There's lots of different like opportunities to jump into that. And I would say if you really want to get started from scratch, I would recommend probably doing some challenges, some like join awards, like they just had the Rookies Awards, and just create some artwork for that, just to get into the water of what you would need to do. And one big recommendation is just go on YouTube and just do tons of tutorials and ask around, be always open for feedback. Don't get criticized, like don't feel criticized. It's just always like a creative feedback most of the time. And I think just keep creating. And one thing I'm still doing nowadays is always looking at references, which is super important if you want to go for photorealism, or just like study lighting and all these kind of smaller things, which you would think would not be really that important, but they actually are really important in day-to-day VFX work. Yeah, and then I would I would say try junior positions, and then it's definitely tricky, but it's important to have a good reel, which shows your work, your strengths, and then you should apply for that specific position. I think that is, it's a broad recommendation, but it's really tough out there, I think. But yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Hard work pays off, though, I think, in this industry.
Yeah. And be passionate. I think passion is also like a big driver in that. So you gotta love what you do, and I think that is just driving you to accomplish your goals.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, we have an audience question here, so I'm just gonna pull that up. Okay. So Liang Hingbuk would like to know, what do you think about the current industry state due to COVID-19? How will it affect the work opportunities for freshers?
Oh, that's a great question. And I can tell you that obviously COVID had a big impact because all the production stopped essentially on set, so they stopped filming. And obviously there's it takes a bit there's an offset when it really affects the industry. But I think starting now, when it slowly fades off the COVID stuff, they only start now to producing again, and there will be a downtime, I believe. And then the question how it will affect fresh new starters, I guess. Yeah, it's tough, I think, because companies also need to get producing, and I can't really say much about it, but I think they will not really try to hire really juniors to get their job started again. So it will definitely be tough. Is all I can say. I don't know. I don't work in the corporate world, so I can't give much advice. But in my opinion, I think it will be a bit difficult to get probably a junior position will be a bit tricky, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have one more question over here. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay, yeah. So somebody asks, I don't know if it can be answered on that presentation. Could I export alpha using the render selection to texture feature Arnold in Maya?
Yeah, let me think about it. So I guess what you wanted to do is in the viewport, you want to draw a render selection to texture. Oh, I see. Sorry, so something else, right? Texture and feature. What you could do for that is you probably would just assign a flat white color to your object. And then you can just render you select your object, and then you do render to selection, which essentially would give you the alpha matte. Obviously it's a little hack, but it's like a white constant color. But I think that would work for you. Yeah, I think that's it.
Tip and trick. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, I think that's about the time we have for a Q&A session, but thank you so much, Arvid. That was awesome. Yeah, super appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed that. Thanks, everyone.
Alrighty. So next up on our webinar today, I am super excited to introduce our second guest artist, Eloi Andaluz Fullà. Eloi has over 15 years of experience working in the VFX industry, and he currently works at Scanline VFX in Montreal. He's worked on a number of big feature films and television series such as Midway, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, the final season of Game of Thrones, which won an Emmy Award for Outstanding VFX. He's also worked on interactive installations and mappings for Childish Gambino, the LAX International Airport, the New York Super Bowl, and more. On top of that, he co-created Effective TDs and has a VFX YouTube channel. So I'll be sure to put those links in the chat blocks below. So today, Eloi is going to be looking at key destruction techniques and principles. So Eloi, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Melinda. Thanks, Arvid. So let me share my screen. So we will talk about distractions, and we can talk about a lot of things about distractions. We had a lot of different types of distractions. We had vehicle distractions, magic effects distraction types. We had building distractions, hero distractions. Then we could talk about going realistic versus going more spectacular for movies. So because sometimes we don't want to go totally realistic. You want to blow bigger. You want always bigger in distractions. So it's something important to consider. We could talk about a scale as well. If having the sense of a scale that something is very big, something is very small, how to handle these situations. We can talk about compositing in distractions, different types of technique distractions that we had a lot, procedural, manual distractions, mix, and different tools that we have in 3ds Max or outside 3ds Max. But because we have 10 minutes, we will focus in some key points. I will not talk about everything, but some of these key elements that I think that we can handle in 10 minutes. So I always start with references. I try to check references that are realistic and as well reference from other movies, because if they just ask for something crazy, I try to check for some key point distractions that I think that they are cool, and I try to integrate it somehow on my distraction that I need to do. If I need to do any distraction, normally I have two big considerations, if we can talk about only two. But one will be if my distraction is on the background or mid-ground, that it's the focus, or there is a lot of motion blur, or if my distraction is on the foreground, very close to camera. And I deal a little different depending where it is. If it's on the background, I want to go fast creating the assets for distraction because it needs to go fast. We don't need so many details. I don't need so many custom distraction. But on the other hand, in foreground, I want that my shapes are really exactly as I want. I want that the cut is exactly what I want. So I go into more manual techniques for cutting. So on this webinar, I will try to showcase really fast the two techniques. One, how I destroy an asset that is for the background, and the other one, how I do it if it's on the foreground. So let's start by the background, that I will go with more a procedural technique. I will destroy this wall. It's basically a box, so there is nothing complex. And from something that is nothing complex, an asset that can be boring as a box, we will try to do something that is a little more cool. When I go procedural, remember this is for the background, mid-ground, I go with procedural techniques. In this case, I use Voronoi. Voronoi, you can use it in 3ds Max in a lot of different plugins. You have Rapidfire Voronoi, you have free scripts. Normally I use thinking particles, so you can use Typeflow. In Typeflow or thinking particles, you have Voronoi, and the cool thing is that it's procedural, so you can change parameters all the time without being destructive. But as you can see, it's very regular. All the sizes are the same. We have this typical Voronoi look that you always want to avoid because it's really basic. And even if it's on the background, you can tell that something is simply a Voronoi and it doesn't look cool. So next step is to break it even more. A lot of people finish there. They think, okay, if maybe before was too simple, break it more and will be more complex, and let's simulate that. But that's a big error. Before going into simulations, you need to make this better. Even if you had a lot of different frags, it's still very similar in size. It's not interesting at all. It still looks like a Voronoi fracture because it is basically a Voronoi fracture. So let's try to improve that. Next step will be clustering them. So we merge each of these frags between them together. Again, in Rapidfire, you have Rapidfire clusters. In Typeflow, you have Typeflow clusters. And in Thinking Particles, you have clustering and any other tool. But as you can see right now, it's still a Voronoi look, but the shapes are much more complex. They look different, more irregular. But still, they are very similar in size between them. So next step will be to make some clusters with more frags and some clusters with less frags. We have difference in size, but it's not really enough for what we want. So next step will be to isolate some of these frags. So instead of cluster everything, some fragments will be not isolated. Now you can see that we start having some variation, but we want to go even further. So we can volume break only some of the smaller ones. So we get smaller ones, and the big ones will still be big. Let's keep working on that. If we want even more detail, we will add debris because we cannot keep breaking and breaking. We simply add debris on the frag size. And right now there is a linear distribution like on random, but it's totally linear. So we have bigger and smaller, but because we have so many, they look totally the same. So next step will be to, instead of doing a linear distribution of sizes for the debris, we will go exponential. You want to have a lot of small debris and only some of them that they will be way bigger. Maybe on the compression of the video, I don't know if it will be totally visible, but it helps a lot. And finally, we can add on the clusters, we can tessellate the sides, and we can do some noise to break totally the cluster, the Voronoi look. So you can see I don't see if you see the mouse, but around the clusters, you can see that right now we have a kind of a noise going on. So it breaks totally the Voronoi look. And you can see the before and the after now. A lot of people end doing the thing on the left and trying to improve the simulation into the simulation side with physics. And they ask why my simulation doesn't look good. And a lot of times it's only because your frags doesn't look good, your simulation will not look good. On the right, this is not moving again, but you can see that if you apply some gravity, the right side will look okay, the left side will be looking boring. So I spend a lot of time always with my destruction on the fragmentation side. And again, all this is procedural, so I can import any asset. You don't need to do anything. It's non-destructive, so you can change your simulations as many times as you want. Without knowing, before we apply the rule of 3, that is having different types of shapes of different sizes. And if you distribute it accordingly in a good way, you will get a very pleasant image to the eye. That's not something I say, it's a rule in compositing. And it's called the rule of 3, the rule of primary, secondary, or tertiary shapes. It has a lot of names, and I apply it a lot in thinking, in distractions. For more information, you can check Neil Blevins, has a very cool page talking about that. And seriously, it helps me a lot. You can see that we did it before here. We had these big frags that will be the clusters. Then we have the medium size that will be the isolated particles. And then the debris are the small or tertiary shapes. And I apply these a lot on the shots we do at the scanline. On this shot, it's from Independence Day. You can see that we have all this cone that will be the primary shape, the bigger one. Then we have the secondary or mid shape that will be these red frags. And finally, we have the small particles in between. And we have the 3 differentiated sizes. Even going to this other shot, that it's very small scale, but we have the same. We have a big cone, so you can see that all the shapes together form this cone visually. Then we have the middle shapes, that will be these clusters, and finally the small debris. If you only have a small debris, it will not look cool. If you have only big debris, it will lack some detail. So it's very important to have these 3 types of different shapes to have a nice, pleasant distraction or any image in general. So we did the background, focusing on the distraction. Now we will go into the foreground, how I cut the same wall and how I will deal with a foreground distraction. For foreground, the biggest difference is that things are very close. It's what we call as well hero shots in production. And before, I was not caring so much about what type of material I was destroying. I will do more or less the same if it's a rock or if it's a brick. Or a metal, because it's really far away normally. But when it's really on the foreground, I want to see by my silhouette of my shape, I want to see what it is. I want to see if it's a brick or if it's a wall or if it's wood or whatever. Because a lot of times you cannot see the texture, you cannot see the material. You have dust, you have fire, it's backlit, so you only see the silhouette. So it's really important, and I put a lot of focus into the silhouette. So we will do this simple scene that I put together with some elements. It's really simple. It's nothing a production shot. And I add these extra elements that are tiles to add more interesting shapes on my destruction. So as you can see, I come from architecture. My background is in architecture. And I like to have details that makes it more believable. But it's really important that your 3D model is as correct as it can be. If you have only one box, you will break one box. But in construction, there are different elements. For walls, you have normally different layers of bricks, you have tiles. If you have a good structure, you will have different panels. So having a well-constructed model will make that when you destroy it, it's much more complex and look better. So always check for construction reference. It's very easy to find these online. Even if you don't know, check for some graph, it's very easy to follow. That's the way I add some extra elements. The other thing I check is for how these elements break. So as I said, it will not break the same brick wall than a concrete wall. They have different characteristics. For example, in bricks, the mortar normally is 30% less resistant than the brick itself. It's because the mortar normally it's not only for gluing, it's also for absorbing dilatations and stuff like that. And you want that if it breaks along the mortar. So it creates these really characteristic cuts into your brick wall. So I try to follow this. In this case, I will cut with Razor. It's a tool from Paul Fuller. We sell it on Effective Technical Director's webpage. You can check it out. And it allows us to create a spline and automatically cut this. It does a lot of things in the background. It uses most of the tools in 3ds Max, sorry. It uses Pro Boolean, it uses different STL checks to check that the cut, it has no errors. So it does a lot of things for you, but allows me to create the cuts precisely where I want, and I can follow the mortar in a very easy way. You can assign shortcuts to it, so it's very easy. Then for the tiles, I will use Razor, but instead of painting manually, I will do it automatically. There is an automatic mode because you don't want always to cut manually, but it takes maybe 1-2 hours to break an asset, but you have much more precision this way. We are in 3ds Max now, and you can see showcasing the wireframe color, because Razor is also creating different wireframe colors. We can see the shapes. And because we have been doing this manually, you can see that more on the center of this wall, I had more fragments and are smaller because it's the impact point. There is more stress on the wall, it will break more. And as soon as it goes farther away from the impact point, the frags are bigger. This is really important. I have a lot of control with cutting manually, so it helps me a lot. And you can see that I had a small frags in between the bricks. It's called rift. We use it everywhere in bricks or in concrete to have these secondary, smaller breaking objects. So before going to simulation, I always spend 5 minutes to prepare my scene. It's really important to prepare your scene. You can simulate all this with high res, but if you digest beforehand your models, it will be faster and it will be easier. You will have less possibilities that the pieces get stuck and things like that. For the car, for example, I convert all my pieces into convex hull. I use a script that is using under the hood some things that are hidden in Max by default, but you can access it via Max script. And on the right, you can see the collisions for the environment. I substitute all the tiles for boxes. This will make your life way easier after. Then I simulate this in thinking particles. You can simulate that with any type flow, p-flow, whatever. In thinking particles, I like it because I have shape collision that is great for distractions. And I try to keep it super simple. Here, I don't know if you are familiar with TP, but I import my objects, I apply gravity, I give properties, and that's all. This simulation on my laptop takes 2 minutes. And I try always to take it really fast. I want to iterate a lot of times, so to be able to tweak everything. At the end, I add a volume break only on the mortar to have even a smaller frags. And with volume break, maybe it takes 5-7 minutes, but not more than that. A lot of people think that having a simulation that takes 5 hours will make the simulation better. And normally this is not the case. It's more iterations will make your simulation better. So try to keep your simulation times low to iterate more. This way you can keep improving over time. With my first simulation that, remember, was only the bricks, I only simulate the bricks. Now I go another step further and I add the tiles. But I don't simulate all together beforehand because normally you simulate using different hierarchies. So first you simulate the things that are structural elements and then you keep adding over top. So now the bricks that are already in cache, they are not simulated anymore. And as you can see, I can tweak things in real time. This curve, it's controlling how many tiles are detaching from the bricks procedurally based on distance to impact. And being that I simulate this beforehand, now these tiles are only getting linked, I can do this super fast. If I had to simulate bricks and tiles at the same time, I will have to wait. Doing this way, it's so fast and you can iterate so much better. And you can see it, I had a bullet solver for the tiles to make it faster. This simulation takes 1 minute or less. Now, next step is to add more details. We had the simulation going on, but you want to break even more the silhouette. So normally in your wall, you will have always different elements. I add some electric cables and you can add rebars and things like that. I don't do that before, because if you had this before attached to the element and you simulate with that, you can have pieces that get interlaced together, and you can have explosions if you use bullet. So basically, I am only link these cables to the bricks, but that's all. It's not interacting, it's not colliding, so it's not super accurate, but normally with motion blur and all these things, it's not even visible. But it's cool to see it when it's backlight. You can see it here, these different elements are simply linked procedurally in thinking particles, so as well, doesn't take any time. And you can see that it breaks a little the silhouette, having these cables here and there. The final pass, it's always having debris. It adds a small detail to your simulation. I think that the video is not loading. But it's a debris pass that we do after in the second pass. And when all this is done, I always try to create some additional elements like cables, can be rebars, can be, yeah, different elements that I like to bend, and I don't simulate them. You can simulate them too if it needs to be super accurate, but it takes time. Sometimes a simple bend modifier and a noise modifier in top, that's all what you need. You add 2 keys and it creates a nice element there that it's simple, super simple to do, and it can bring the eye for the people checking, seeing it, and maybe they think it's something super complex, and yeah, it's simply a bend modifier and looks great. I use it a lot of times with bending metals. I trick it. Usually I don't sim it, I simply add a bend modifier, and it helps a lot. Finally, when all this is done, we cover everything with dust. In Scanline, we use our own tool, Flowline, but in this case, I send the scene to my friend Sebastian Scheffer, and he used our tool, Storm, that Sebastian is developing. That it's a granular solver, but he's working into having smoke as well. So he get all the elements that I export with Alembic. He imported into Storm and simulate using a Storm. Then I import back this BDB into 3ds Max. With Arnold, you have Arnold BDB importer, that it's great. It's very easy to import and tweak the shader there. And that's the final simulation with everything together. I am not a compositor or anything. I simply render and that's the result. But thank you a lot for all the people that helps doing this webinar, and thank you for listening. And we can go into a round of questions if you have any. Thanks.
Thanks, Eloi. That was so interesting. That was super cool. We have a few questions for our audience, and then I have a few questions also, if that's okay. So our first question here, were the shots just shown in the Independence Day bit created using 3ds Max and TP?
Excuse me?
So were the shots that were shown from Independence Day created using 3ds Max and TP?
Yeah, mostly it's 3ds Max, a lot of, yeah, it was everything thinking particles, and we use a lot of Flowline.
Okay, cool. Can this workflow work? Oh, sorry. Can this workflow work for Houdini too? What do you think about 3ds Max versus Houdini for FX?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what I talk about is general techniques, so you can apply it anywhere. And Houdini versus 3ds Max, yeah, Houdini is great. It has a lot of solvers integrated. 3ds Max, we are depending a little more with plugins like Thinking Particles, Krakatoa, and things like that, but it's great. And I think that Thinking Particles specifically for rigid bodies is a really good package. We have Shape Collision, that is a voxel system. The voxel system, for example, in Houdini, it's a little outdated and they didn't work much into it anymore. They focus a lot in bullet, that it's also great. So yeah, it has pros and cons. I think Thinking Particles is very fast to create rigid body simulations. The workflow is focused only for rigid bodies and particles, so it's great for that.
Mm-hmm. Great. We have another question. Do you usually spend that much time manually fracturing objects? It looked super nice on the brick wall, but also quite complex.
Yes, we do. Normally, so we try to go as well procedural when we do, as I said, backgrounds. But when you want really detail, and a lot of times the client or in the company, we want really specific cuts. It's not simply a random cut that it needs to happen. It needs to happen a cut in this place. And this way, the manual is normally at the end the fastest, because you want to have, I don't know, sometimes you cut 500 pieces and then they ask, oh, this piece on the left, we want it not in this shape, but in this other shape. So you need to cut it manually. And yeah, it takes some time, but actually it's kind of cool. It kind of breaks your day. So maybe you have a half day that it's okay. This half day I will pass it breaking elements. So you put music and you cut. But with our tools, we have Razor and we have Fast Cutter. You can assign shortcuts and it's actually quite fast. You can be really fast cutting. So yeah, I mean, it makes a difference, I think, at the end.
Yeah. Do you have any tips on how to make a fresher's effects reel great? So any tips?
Fresher effects reel great? I mean, the junior effects reel?
Yeah, that's what I understood. Like a junior.
I will... Normally, junior, you need to keep practicing. You can follow tutorials. My suggestion, I will say, is that I see a lot of junior reels that comes to the studio and they look the same because they follow the same tutorials with the same assets. Mm-hmm. And sometimes for a studio, trying to evaluate someone that just follow tutorials, it's hard because you don't know if this guy, if you give something that it's not something that he follows step by step, he will be able to handle. So obviously you are a junior, follow tutorials, it's great, but maybe try to change the asset that you use. So if you see a tutorial that they are destroying a building and this tutorial comes with the asset itself, try to grab another asset and try to destroy the same, but with a different asset, because maybe you will find problems, and as well with these problems that you will find solutions later, and it will help you improve.
That's good advice. So get creative with it, essentially. Yes. Here's another question. Do you think TypeFlow will replace thinking particles?
I think TypeFlow is great, and we start to use it, but I don't think, right now I see it like a very cool, I mean, it's super cool. Yeah, and TypeFlow, it's not only about particles. All the modifiers that Tyson is doing, they are great. So I am using a lot of modifiers, for example. They are, right now, I mean, you need to use it. But as well, TypeFlow and TP, they have different advantages, each one. Thinking particles is more powerful with caches. I think that the hierarchy way of working with caches in thinking particles is better for complex shots. At the end, it's different systems. TypeFlow is more high level. TP is more low level, meaning that with TypeFlow, you can go faster creating a setup. But if you want something really specific, you can get a block, where in thinking particles, these blocks are less usual because it's more low level, meaning that you will need to create more nodes. So for beginners can be a little more complex, I understand. But for complex stuff, I think I like a little more TP. But I mean, I like both. They have both big advantage and disadvantage.
What is the best plugins for fluids, Fume effects, or anything that you can suggest?
Yeah, that's, I think I am more used to Fume effects, but now Phoenix from Chaos Group, it's doing great progress. I don't know what to suggest between both. I mean, it's the same situation in TP, TypeFlow. I think both are great. And
both have advantages.
You can use a Storm if you want, that it's coming. I mean, they are both great. I will not have any preference.
Sounds good. Okay, so a few extra questions just on the side out of curiosity. So you said you had a background in architecture. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious like how you went from architecture to VFX, because it sounds like you went from building things to destroying things.
Yes,
and it's really interesting.
So I started in architecture, and on my first year of career, I asked for AutoCAD. Someone had a DVD with an AutoCAD with a demo license, and it comes 3ds Max as well. And I installed it just for curiosity, and I love it. And I started learning by my own. After going out from the university, I passed 6-8 hours a day learning, and I had not even internet. It was simply clicking, checking what it was doing, but I love it. So then I started integrating 3D for my work. So I started doing RGB, and I started working with different studios, building visualizations. And then I jumped to a company that as well, they was doing some advertising. So I started doing advertising. And, but on my side, I was working as an architect, and we had the big crisis in Spain in 2008. Well, it was worldwide, but in Spain it was really bad. And there was no job for architecture. I tried to do a master in structural analysis, thinking that after that I will be able to find something, but as well, it was even worse. So there was still some work around 3D, and I started doing mapping shows. And after that, I didn't stop. And it's something that it was my passion. I was passing so many hours on my site, learning more 3D. So at the end, it was like, okay, I can maybe simply follow this, that it's my hobby as my job.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
So what's one of the most challenging parts of your job?
I will say maybe I pass 5% of my time building a setup, and I have 95% of the time debugging or doing tweaks. And it's about, okay, tweaking here, tweaking there. It's about having, in visual effects, it's maybe different than in advertising or other fields. Sometimes in the other fields, you pass a lot of time doing the setup, then 3-4 tweaks, it's done. In visual effects, you need to do 200, 300 iterations for each shot. So it's being able to have patience and keep going.
Powering through.
Yeah.
I think we have time for another question, one last question. How does one specialize in destruction techniques if they wanted to?
Excuse me?
How does one go about specializing in destruction techniques?
For me, it was kind of, I get a little bored of doing buildings. So after that, I started looking for other things, and I found effects. And I learned, actually, at the beginning, there was not so many tutorials. I started with Film Effects 1, I started with PFlow. And back on the day, I was learning in YouTube, checking Russian or Chinese tutorials, because it was the only things that there was, or not even YouTube, there was written tutorials. So I was trying to realize what they was doing and doing it on my site. Now it's way much easier. I think there are so many information for free in YouTube. And yeah, I think that the way is keep practicing. It's the only way. You can follow tutorials. Maybe you can buy courses that they are well structured, but at the end it's practicing and practicing and keep trying.
Good advice. Okay, so I think we actually, okay, last question. I just want to take one more from the audience because we got a few more. So we have a question about, do I have to show all particles, fluids, RBD, and pyro in my reel, or just focus on one thing? So if you have a suggestion in terms of a reel for that.
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends. The thing is, like, if you only have fluids, for example, and you are really good and you only have fluids, you will be hired for sure, but you will only be doing fluids because they will hire you for fluids. Having variety, it's also good. Some companies, it depends. And you can have luck having both types of reels. Some companies at a certain point, they look for a guy and effects that can do a little of everything. So if you have a reel with a little of everything, they will hire you. But sometimes there are companies that they need to fill a post that it's only water. So looking a reel that it's very good with only water, it's like, well, this is our guy. So depending on what you want to do, if you only want to specialize in something very concrete, I think that you can have the same possibilities. Being super specific in one, having a very good reel in one thing, than having a little of everything.
Good advice. Okay, I think that's about the time we have for a Q&A session. Thank you so much, Eloi. That was awesome and very insightful.
I enjoy a lot the webinar and all the people attending. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so I'm just going to share our little final slide here. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. It was a real pleasure. Thank you to Arvid and Eloi for your time and your expertise and all of your wisdom. As we said before, there's going to be a recording of the webinar that we are going to send everyone who's on the call. We're going to send that to you by email within the next few days. We're also going to have more webinars like this one in the near future. So if you're interested, please join us at area.autodesk.com and we'll have more information there. And that's about it. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Bye, thank you.